The elevator doors opened on the 34th floor, and the first thing Ethan Cole noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of early morning, before the coffee machines hissed to life and the phones began their low, persistent ringing. This was a different kind of quiet, pressed flat against the walls, held in place by something heavier than routine. The assistants at their desks moved with a careful precision, eyes tracking their screens with unusual focus, as though looking up might cost them something. Ethan had worked at Meridian Consulting for 7 years. He knew every creak in the hallway, every flicker in the fluorescent panel above the corner printer. He knew that when the third-floor kitchen smelled like burned coffee before 9, someone had pulled in overnight. He knew, too, that the energy in a room could change the moment a new executive arrived, that particular atmospheric shift. Something between anticipation and dread. This morning, the air felt like February itself had moved indoors. He set his coat on the back of his chair, nodded to Derek in the adjacent cubicle, who gave him a look he couldn't quite read, and opened his laptop. He had 40 minutes before the 9 o'clock project review. He had spent the subway ride mentally organizing his talking points. Had thought about stopping for a second coffee but decided against it. Wanting to arrive a little early, wanting to show the kind of steadiness that had kept him employed through 2 rounds of layoffs and 1 very turbulent acquisition. 7 years. He had weathered all of it. The message came at 8:43. "Mr. Cole, please report to conference room A on the 34th floor at your earliest convenience." "Office of the CEO." He read it twice. Then he straightened his tie, a reflex, not a decision, and walked toward the glass-walled room at the far end of the corridor. The new CEO had arrived 2 weeks ago, slipping into the building with barely a press release and no all-hands introduction. Her name was Olivia Reed. People described her in half-sentences. Efficient, decisive, doesn't waste words. Someone in legal had called her surgical. The word had circulated through the office like weather. The door to conference room A was already open. She was standing at the window with her back to him, looking out at the city below. New York in February, the buildings disappearing into low cloud, the streets whitened with last night's snowfall, the sky the color of old silver. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back precisely. There was something in the set of her shoulders, composed, still, deliberate, that made him slow his step without meaning to. She turned when she heard him enter, and the world stopped, not slowed, not wavered. Stopped the way it had on a Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago, when a doctor had met him in a waiting room, and the fluorescent light above had been buzzing, and he had known, before a single word was spoken, that everything was about to become a before and an after. The woman standing in front of him had Lily's face, not similar, not reminiscent, not the way a stranger sometimes carries the ghost of someone you've lost in the angle of a jawline or the color of their eyes. This was Lily's face, the slight asymmetry at the left corner of the mouth, the way the brow settled just before speaking, the particular quality of stillness she carried when she was in a room she was uncertain of, even the way she tilted her head, fractionally, as she assessed him, that exact degree, that exact patience. He was aware that he had stopped breathing. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was measured. Professional. Nothing in it that reached for him. "Please, sit down." He sat. He could not have explained how his legs carried him to the chair, or how his hands remained still on the armrests, or how his expression held. Everything that constituted the functioning surface of Ethan Cole, the competence, the composure, the 7 years of showing up and performing steadiness, moved on automatic, while something beneath it simply fell. She spoke for 3 minutes. He caught fragments. "Restructuring, role consolidation, your position has been eliminated. HR will provide severance documentation." She was not unkind. She was not warm. She was factual in the way that a surgeon is factual, no excess, no decoration, only precision. When she finished, she asked if he had questions. He looked at her. The window behind her held the white city. A single flake drifted past the glass. "No," he said. "Thank you." He stood. She extended her hand and he shook it, her grip firm. Brief, her eyes meeting his with something that might have been professionalism or might have been something much more carefully contained. And then he walked back down the corridor, collected his coat, and rode the elevator 34 floors down to the lobby. Outside, the snow was still falling. He stood on the sidewalk and let it settle on his shoulders and did not move for a long time. The city continued its business around him, cabs passing, someone brushing past with a lowered umbrella, a delivery driver navigating the white slicked curb, all of it proceeding with the complete indifference of a city that does not pause for personal reckoning. He was aware that his hands were cold. He put them in his coat pockets and stood there anyway. The woman up there cannot exist. Emma was 6 years old and she still slept with the lights on. Ethan had stopped apologizing for it to anyone who commented. Some things you allowed. Some things you understood had their reasons and you let them be. The small nightlight in the shape of a crescent moon that plugged into the outlet beside her bed, pale yellow, soft, was one of those things. He had stopped noticing it except when he passed the room in the dark and saw it still burning. Emma, a round shape beneath her quilt, utterly still in sleep in the way only children can be. The apartment on West 83rd was not large. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where the window faced a brick wall, a living room with a couch they had chosen together, he and Lily, from a showroom in Brooklyn, on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Emma had not yet existed, even as a thought. The couch was showing its age now. He kept it. He kept a great many things. The coffee mug on the second shelf from the left, the one with the small chip in the handle that Lily had refused to throw away, claiming it gave it character. The photograph on the bookshelf, not the formal wedding portrait, but the candid one taken by a friend at a dinner party. Lily, laughing at something off camera, one hand raised, mid-sentence, entirely herself. The green wool scarf on the hook beside the door. She had left it there on the last morning, and he had never moved it. He did not wear the scarf. He did not use the mug. He simply kept them where they were, evidence of a shape that no longer occupied the space but had been real and had mattered. The accident had happened on a Tuesday, February. Snow on the ground. Emma had been 7 months old, and Ethan had been at work, and the call had come at 2. 17 inches the afternoon. He knew this because he had looked at the clock on his computer screen at 2:15. And then his phone had rung, and after that, time had operated by different rules. He had not thought of himself as the kind of person who could raise a child alone. He was not confident that he was doing it correctly, even now. But Emma was healthy and smart and kind, and she made drawings that she taped to the refrigerator without asking permission. And he thought that if Lily could see her, she would recognize something of herself in the child's deliberate, unself-conscious joy. Work had been the structure, the anchor, 7 years of it, providing the shape that grief had tried to dissolve a reason to leave the apartment at a specific hour, a purpose that operated on schedule regardless of how the interior weather was behaving. He had not loved the job with any particular passion, but he had needed it the way you need a scaffold when the underlying structure is still healing. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and did not drink it. The snow outside had thickened. The streetlights were haloed in white. He had spent the afternoon managing the practical things, the HR paperwork, the return of his access badge, a call to his bank to review his savings, moving from task to task, with the disciplined efficiency he had developed for the bad days. Do the next thing, then the next. Don't look at the whole of it yet. But now Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet and there was nothing left to do. And he sat at the kitchen table and thought about the woman with Lily's face. He picked up his phone and found himself on LinkedIn before he had consciously decided to search. Olivia Reed, CEO, Meridian Consulting. The profile photo was professional, carefully composed. But there it was, that face. He set the phone down, pressed both palms flat against the table. It cannot only be resemblance. The resemblance is too complete. It took him 4 days to find almost nothing. He told himself he was not obsessed. He was methodical, which was different. He had always been the kind of man who, when something didn't add up, felt an almost physical compulsion to locate the missing figure. It was why he had been good at his job. It was why, after Lily died, he had spent 3 weeks reconstructing the timeline of her last day in a kind of grief that looked, from the outside, like information gathering. Olivia Reed appeared, publicly, approximately 3 years ago. Before that, nothing. No college alumni directories. No professional citations. No conference photographs. No trace of the ordinary digital sediment a person accumulates simply by existing in the contemporary world. Her LinkedIn listed a previous role at a London-based consultancy, but when he searched for her name in any London context, the results were thin and strange there, but barely, as though someone had constructed a background rather than lived one. He was not a suspicious person by nature, but the absence of a past was its own kind of evidence. He learned more from the office than from the internet. Derek, who had an instinct for institutional gossip sharpened by years of careful observation, provided fragments over coffee in the break room on Wednesday. No one knows who hired her or who recommended her. She doesn't attend the social things. She eats lunch alone in her office every day. She's been here 2 weeks, and she knows every department's budget figures by memory. On Thursday, he had returned to the building, ostensibly to complete some transition paperwork HR had asked for, but truthfully because there was something he needed to verify with his own eyes. He sat in the lobby for 20 minutes before she appeared. She came from the elevator bank at noon, her coat on, moving with that hurried certainty she seemed to carry everywhere. He watched her cross the lobby and push through the revolving door into the street, and then he followed at a distance. Hands in his pockets, in the way that a man might follow a direction without admitting to himself he had committed to a destination. She walked 4 blocks through the snow to a small cafe on Amsterdam Avenue. She ordered something at the counter. He waited across the street in the shelter of an awning and then sat at a table near the window. He watched her through the glass. She did not look at her phone. She did not review documents. She sat with her hands around her cup and looked at the street outside, and there was something in her expression, not the CEO stillness she wore in the office, but something rawer, less assembled, that arrested him. She looked, he thought, like someone keeping themselves company. He almost went in. He stopped himself. But on Friday, something happened that he could not explain away. He was waiting in the lobby for his appointment with HR when she came through on her way out for the same midday walk. She paused at the door to exchange a brief word with the building's security guard, a thing she apparently did every day, he realized. The guard's familiarity with her arrival, confirming routine, and as she turned away from the conversation, her left hand moved to her right wrist, a gesture. Automatic, unconscious. Fingers pressing lightly against the inside of the wrist, as though feeling for something. He had seen that gesture every day for 3 years of marriage. Lily had done it whenever she was managing anxiety she didn't want to show. A private anchor. She had never explained it. He wasn't sure she'd known she did it. He sat in the lobby chair and did not move until the appointment time. She is not just like Lily. She carries Lily's body. He made himself wait another week before approaching her. He used the time to think carefully about what he knew and what he was assuming, and to examine the difference between the two with as much rigor as he could manage. The resemblance was extraordinary, but not, in itself, impossible. The gestural similarity, the wrist, the head tilt could be coincidence, or it could be the kind of unconscious physical inheritance that ran in families. The absent history was strange, but not inexplicable. People remade themselves. People left things behind. But the week of waiting did not produce a rational explanation. It produced more observations. He had taken to walking past the building in the evenings. This was, he admitted to himself, unreasonable, but the alternative was sitting in the apartment and not sleeping. And twice he had seen her light still burning in the corner office long after the other floors went dark. Once, crossing the street below, he had looked up and seen her standing at the window, looking out over the city in the same posture she had held on the morning she fired him, still composed, entirely alone. The city was a particular kind of beautiful in February, if you were the right kind of sad. The snow gave everything a softened edge. The reflections on wet pavement had a warmth that the sky withheld. He had always found it melancholy in the way that certain music is melancholy, not painful, but full of something. He found her on the third Friday, not in front of the office, but at the cafe on Amsterdam Avenue, at the same corner table. He walked in. He ordered coffee. He sat 2 tables away, and when she looked up and recognized him, he did not pretend he had come accidentally. "You were Lily Reed's sister," he said. The cafe noise continued around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, a burst of laughter from the counter, and inside it, Olivia Reed became very still. He kept his voice level. He was not accusing her of anything. He was placing a fact between them and waiting to see what she did with it. "How did you?" she began. "I saw the photograph," he said. "In your bag 3 weeks ago." She looked at him for a long moment. In her face he saw for the first time something that was not Olivia Reed, something older and more unguarded. "You loved her," she said. It wasn't a question. She looked down at her cup. Outside, the snow had resumed, lazy and unhurried. "I found out I had a sister," she said carefully, 3 years ago. "A DNA test. I'd been adopted as an infant. I didn't know. My adoptive parents had passed by then. There was no one to ask." She paused. "I found her name. I hired someone to find her." He waited. "By the time I found her, she had already been gone for 2 years. Her voice stayed controlled, but the effort of keeping it that way was visible. You were all that was left." She told him the rest of it on the walk back. They moved through the snow without destination down Amsterdam, east on 79th, into the park, where the paths were white and empty, and no one would overhear. And she spoke in the way of someone releasing something they had rehearsed and revised, until the words were no longer quite words, but only necessary. Sound. She and Lily had been born the same January morning in a hospital in western Massachusetts. Olivia had been adopted within the week, an arrangement made before the birth, by a mother who was 17 years old and had no resources and no margin. Lily had stayed. Olivia had gone to a family in Connecticut, a good family, people who had been kind and present and who had never told her because they hadn't known there was anything to tell. The DNA service had been a casual thing, a gift from a friend, the kind of novelty people exchanged that year. She had sent in the sample without expectation. The result had come back on a Tuesday in October. Sibling, Lily Ann Reed. Match probability, 99.8%. She had stood in her kitchen in London, she was working in London then, building herself back from a failed partnership and a period she described only as lost, and read the notification 3 times. Then she had sat on the floor. Then she had made coffee and sat at the table and looked at the wall for a long time. The investigator had taken 6 weeks. He had given her a file, photographs, an address, a name. Married. 1 daughter. Husband. Ethan Cole. The photographs had been taken from a distance, the ordinary surveillance of civic life. Lily walking with a stroller, Lily at the farmer's market on Columbus Avenue, Lily outside the apartment building on 83rd Street. Olivia had put the file in a drawer. She had told herself she needed time to prepare. She had told herself she would reach out when she was ready, when she had found the right words for the right letter. When she had resolved the terror of introducing herself to a stranger who was also, genetically, herself. 6 months of drawer. Then, another. The call had come from the investigator, not from Lily. He had been monitoring, she hadn't asked him to stop. Had she and he had seen the obituary. He had called her as a professional courtesy. She had not attended the funeral. She had not known how to explain herself. She had let it pass and had hated herself for letting it pass, and had spent the following year in a kind of suspended grief for someone she had never met, which was its own particular cruelty, the mourning of a possibility rather than a person. Finding the CEO role at Meridian had been an accident of timing and someone else's referral. She had not, at first, noticed the name on the employee roster. When she had told herself it was coincidence, that she would handle it professionally, that she would not allow the personal architecture of her own unresolved guilt to interfere with the management of a business. "And then I saw you," she said. They had stopped at the edge of the park's central lawn, the snow unmarked in front of them. "On my first day. In the briefing, you were presenting the third quarter projections. You were wearing a blue tie and you had a photograph on your desk. I could see it from across the room and it was—" She stopped. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I couldn't have you there every day." She said it without defensiveness, only the exhausted honesty of someone who has stopped managing. "I couldn't look at you and know what I'd failed to do and keep functioning. It was a coward's decision. I fired you because I couldn't face you." The snow came down between them, small and steady. "She would have loved you," Ethan said. "She loved everyone who was worth it, and she had an instinct for who was." Olivia pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "I needed you to know," she said, "that I know I don't get to claim any of it. I don't get to be her family. I was too late for that. I just—" She exhaled. "I didn't know where else to put it." He told Emma that Olivia was a friend. Emma, being 6 and perceptive in ways that disarmed him regularly, considered this for a moment and then asked if she was a nice friend or a work friend. "Both," he said. "Okay," Emma said, and returned to the serious business of drawing horses. Olivia came to the apartment on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the cafe conversation. Ethan had not planned it as a formal event. He had suggested coffee, a low-stakes thing. Nothing waited, but as the afternoon developed, he watched her move through the small rooms with an attention that was not intrusive but absolute, the way someone studies a place they have imagined for a long time. She paused at the photograph on the bookshelf. The candid party one, Lily laughing, hand raised. She stood in front of it for perhaps 30 seconds, not saying anything. "She looks," Olivia began. "Happy," Ethan said. She was. Olivia nodded. She didn't reach for the photograph, which he appreciated. There was something in her restraint, the careful maintenance of a respectful distance from something she wanted to touch, that he recognized as the behavior of someone who had thought hard about what she was and wasn't entitled to. They talked for 4 hours. He had not anticipated 4 hours. He had not, if he was honest, anticipated anything beyond the careful, bounded exchange of two people who shared a complicated context. But the afternoon expanded around them. He told her things about Lily that no one else still carried. The way she sang off-key in the kitchen with complete conviction, the particular laugh she had for genuinely funny things versus the polite one she used for people she was trying to spare. The way she had decided, 3 weeks after Emma was born, that every plant in the apartment needed a name, and had spent an evening assigning them all with the seriousness of a diplomat, and had been offended when Ethan forgot the name of the fern. Olivia laughed at the fern story. It was a real laugh, unguarded, surprised, and he noticed it the way you notice when a room you've been in only at night is suddenly in daylight. Something in her face reorganized. She told him about growing up in Connecticut. The good parts and the confusing parts, and the specific loneliness of being an only child in a quiet house. The sense that something had always been slightly unaccounted for. She had been told she was adopted at 11. She had not pursued the question of birth parents for 20 years, which she described as a choice that had felt like protection and turned out to be avoidance. Emma appeared from her bedroom at 3 in the afternoon, dragging a worn stuffed rabbit and regarding Olivia with the frank assessment that only small children can execute without social consequence. "You look like my mom," Emma said. The room became very still. "I know," Olivia said after a moment. Her voice was careful and steady. Is that okay? Emma considered. Are you magic? She asked. No, Olivia said. I'm just someone who knew her. In a way. Emma thought about this, appeared to reach a satisfactory conclusion, and held out the stuffed rabbit. This is Captain, she said. He likes people who sit on the floor. Olivia sat on the floor. Emma sat beside her, and they examined Captain together with the gravity of a committee, and Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter and this woman, who shared half her chromosomes, and felt something shift in him that he did not immediately have a name for. He noticed it first as a mistake. That was how he catalogued it. Those first weeks, a perceptual error. The mind doing what minds do when they encounter the face of someone lost. He was not, he told himself firmly, feeling anything about Olivia Reed. He was experiencing the complicated neurological fallout of grief meeting the unexpected. He was a rational person. He could identify the mechanism, but the mechanism, as it turned out, was not sufficient explanation. The thing about grief is that it metabolizes differently than we're taught to expect. It is not, in Ethan's experience, a uniform diminishment that moves in a steady line toward resolution. It exists in pockets, and certain pockets remain sealed for years, and then something opens them. Not always the thing you'd predict, and what comes out is not only the original pain, but everything that has accumulated in the dark beside it. The love that had nowhere to go, the ordinary daily tenderness that had been interrupted, the future that was never collected. Being with Olivia was opening something. He recognized that clearly enough. What he couldn't determine, with any confidence, was what it contained. He watched her, over the following weeks, become incrementally less armored. She had resigned from Meridian an email to the board, curt and unambiguous, with 2 weeks transition, and she was consulting independently now, working from a rented office uptown, building the kind of practice she said she should have built a decade ago. She seemed to operate best, he observed, when she had control of her own structure. She was not easy company. She had the directness of someone who had stopped softening her observations sometime in her late 20s and never recovered the habit. She did not make small talk without effort, and the effort was visible. She had opinions about things and stated them without the apologetic framing that he had come to expect from most people, and this was both refreshing and occasionally disorienting. She was also, and this was where the accounting became difficult, not Lily, not in the ways that mattered for this purpose. Where Lily had been warm in a way that was almost helplessly generous, Olivia had warmth that had to be earned, and, once you'd earned it, was given without reservation. Where Lily had moved through rooms as though slightly delighted by everything she encountered, Olivia moved with a deliberate containment that made the moments when she relaxed, really relaxed, genuinely feel like a specific kind of privilege. He realized on a Tuesday evening in late March, looking forward to seeing her on Thursday. He sat with this information for a long time. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with. There was the obvious architecture of the situation. The face, the biological connection, the shared history of loss. Any feeling he was developing in Olivia's direction would be, from the outside, impossible to explain cleanly. He could hear the interrogation. How do you know you're not just? Isn't she just a... How can you be sure? He didn't have clean answers. He had only what was actually happening in him, which was that Olivia Reed was becoming a specific person to him, not a replacement, not a reflection, not a carrier of Lily's face, but a particular human being with her own weight and texture, and the particular quality of presence that belongs only to one person and cannot be transferred or substituted. He did not know what to do with that. He called his friend Garrett, who had known him for 15 years and had a high tolerance for complicated honesty, and had dinner with him on a rainy Wednesday, and said, "There's something happening that I don't know what to do with." Garrett listened to the whole of it without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. He did not flinch at the twin revelation, did not make the face that Ethan had been unconsciously bracing, for the slightly appalled expression of someone trying to locate an appropriate category for a thing that resists categorization. He just listened, working his way through his pasta with the patient attention of a man who takes his friends seriously. When Ethan finished, Garrett set down his fork and was quiet for a long moment, looking at the rain on the window behind Ethan's shoulder with the expression of someone consulting a private index. "There are two separate things here," Garrett said finally. "There's the face, and there's the person, and I think you already know that they're not the same thing, or you wouldn't be losing sleep over it. What I'm asking," Ethan said, "is whether I'm capable of knowing the difference." "You're asking me that question," Garrett said, "which means you've already identified that it matters." "Which means," he picked up his fork again, "you probably already know. You're just scared of the answer being real." Ethan considered this. "The question," Garrett said, "isn't whether it makes sense from the outside. The question is whether it's true." Ethan nodded slowly. "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." She pulled back on a Thursday evening in April. They had been walking in the park after dinner, a thing that had become a pattern, easy and low-key, the kind of evening that didn't require naming, and he had said something small and unremarkable, a reference to a thing she had mentioned once and he had remembered, and she had gone quiet in a way that was different from her ordinary quiet. He noticed. He said nothing. They walked another block. Then she stopped on the path and turned to face him and said, with the careful, controlled honesty that was becoming one of the things he most valued about her, "I need to say something, and I need you to not be kind about it. I need you to actually think about it." "All right," he said. "I look like her." She said it flatly. "I have her face and some of her gestures, and apparently I laugh in a way that sounds like her, which you mentioned once and then didn't mention again, which means you noticed it was significant, and you knew her for 7 years, and you loved her, and she died, and you're still..." She stopped, restarted. "I need to know that when you look at me, you're looking at me." The park around them was quiet. A dog moved through the trees on the far path. The streetlights had come on, orange through the new leaves. He opened his mouth. She held up her hand. "Don't answer quickly. I mean it." He closed his mouth. He thought about the honest answer. Not the answer that would reassure her, not the answer that would manage the moment, but the actual, factual answer that he owed her. "I can't tell you," he said, "that the resemblance doesn't matter. It would be a lie, and you'd know it. When I first saw you, I saw Lily. That's the truth. The first month, every time I looked at you, some part of what I was responding to was the face." She nodded. Not hurt, prepared for this. She had thought about it too. "But," he said, "the face is the same. The person isn't. And somewhere in those weeks, I stopped. I stopped overlaying. I started seeing what's actually there. Which is you, and they're not the same thing." "How can you be certain of that?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but something in it asked to be convinced against its own doubt. "Because," he said slowly, "if you had Lily's personality, if you were her, somehow, in character, I think I would have retreated. I think it would have been too much. But you're not. You're completely different in the ways that matter." For he stopped. "For this." "For what?" she asked. And there it was. The question, the one he had been moving toward for weeks without knowing how to arrive at it. And now he was here, and she was asking, and the park was quiet, and the lights were orange, and snow was long gone, replaced by the tentative green of early spring. He did not answer it that night, because she had asked him not to answer quickly, and he was a man who respected instructions, and because some things needed more than a single Thursday evening to hold. She walked home alone. He watched her go, and then he stood on the path for a long time in the early spring dark, understanding with a clarity that was almost physical that he was losing something he had not yet admitted he wanted. He went home and found Emma still awake, which was a violation of bedtime protocol that he would normally address with consistency and calm. Instead, he sat on the edge of her bed and let her tell him about the dream she'd had about a horse who could also bake bread. And he listened with complete attention, and when she had finished and her eyes were heavy again, he said, "Do you remember when we talked about Mom? About how she's not here anymore, but she's still in my heart," Emma said immediately, with the confidence of someone who has the answer to a question they've been asked before. "Yes." He smoothed her hair back. "Does that still feel true?" "Yes," she said. "And in yours too?" "Yes," he said. She was asleep within 4 minutes. He went to the kitchen and sat at the table, the apartment quiet around him, and thought about Lily. Not the grief of it, not the absence, not the weight of the 5 years since, but Lily herself, what she had been, what she had wanted from him and for him. She had not been a person who believed in enclosure. She had been, if anything, almost compulsively expansive in her feelings toward people, toward experience, toward the idea that life was large and should be lived in proportion to its largeness. She had been frustrated by his tendency toward containment, had spent 3 years of marriage gently, persistently pressing at the walls he kept around his interiority. "You don't have to protect everyone from what you actually feel," she had said once, in the particular voice she reserved for truths she wanted to land cleanly. She had also believed, in a way that he had sometimes found almost inconvenient in its consistency, that love was not a finite resource. That caring about someone did not subtract from what you carried for someone else. That the heart was not a ledger, and feeling something new did not require deleting something old. She had said this in different forms. About many things, about Emma arriving and whether there would be enough. About friends who came and went. About the ordinary renewals that life required. He had listened and partially believed it, and only now, sitting at the kitchen table at 11:30 at night with the apartment settled around him, understood that she had been preparing him for this too. Not for this specific configuration of circumstances she could not have known, but for the principle of it. The willingness to stay open. He remembered the last real conversation they'd had. Not the last morning that had been ordinary and rushed, and he had been half thinking about a meeting, and she had kissed him goodbye, and he had kissed her back, but without the full weight of his attention, which was a thing he had lived with and eventually learned not to use as a weapon against himself. But 2 nights before, they had been in bed reading, and she had set her book down and looked at him with that look she had when something had been accumulating in her, and she'd decided to say it. "Don't stop living," she'd said. "I know that sounds like a thing people say. But I mean, actually don't stop. I mean, eat the good stuff and go on trips and love people. Don't just maintain." He had said something deflecting. He couldn't now remember what. He had been maintaining for 5 years. That was the honest accounting. He picked up his phone and wrote her a message, one he did not send, would never send, that existed only in the Notes app on his phone and had no recipient. "I think I've been doing what you told me not to. I think I've been maintaining. And I think there's someone. I think she's real in particular and not you, and also somehow made of some of the same material, and I don't know how to explain that except that it's true. I think you would have known her, and I think you would have wanted to. I think you would have told her things about her own laugh that would have made her cry. I think she's been alone for a long time in a specific way that you might have recognized. I don't know what to do with all of this, but I think you'd tell me." He put the phone down. He knew what she would tell him. He found her the next morning. Not dramatically, the city did not provide for dramatics on a Friday at 8:15 in April. He texted her before he could revise the impulse. "Can I come to your office this morning? There's something I want to say, and I want to say it before I think too much about it." She replied within 2 minutes. "Come at 9. Her office was a rented room on the 5th floor of a building on 72nd Street, a desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked over a courtyard where a woman was walking a very small dog in slow, deliberate circles. Nothing on the walls. A coffee maker on a side table that looked well used. She was standing when he arrived, which told him she had been standing for a while. He did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room, and she stood at the window, and he said, "I thought about what you asked. About whether I'm looking at you or looking at her. She waited. When you asked, my honest answer was that I didn't fully know. And I went home and I thought about it, and I thought about Lily, and I thought about you. Separately. For the first time in a long time, not overlaid, not compared, but just separately. He stopped, started again. Lily had a laugh that was immediate, like she couldn't hold it. Yours arrives after a delay, like you're checking whether it's safe. Lily talked to strangers on the subway without self-consciousness. You look at them and decide not to, and then sometimes you do anyway, and I've noticed you do it more than you did 3 months ago. Lily was afraid of deep water. You told me last week you learned to swim in the ocean when you were 30, and you did it because you were afraid and you were tired of being afraid. Lily cried at commercials. I have never seen you cry at anything except, he stopped, except when you found out you had a sister, he said. And even then, you probably cried alone. She did not confirm this, but she also did not deny it. You are not her, he said. And I love the fact that you're not her, not in spite of it. Because the person in this room is someone I have come to actually know. Not a face I needed. Not a grief I was working through. You. He said it as simply as he could. I'm talking about you. The small dog continued its circles in the courtyard below. A cloud moved and the light changed, briefly, before settling again. I lost her too, Olivia said. Her voice was quieter than he'd heard it. I know it doesn't count the same way. I never even met her. But there was something I was carrying. All this time, this particular weight of what I didn't do, and I think... She stopped. I think meeting you was the first time I stopped carrying it alone. He crossed the room. I'm not asking you to be anyone's second choice, he said. I'm asking if you want to start something that belongs entirely to you. To us. She looked at him for a long moment. In her eyes, Lily's eyes, her own eyes, a shape they had both inherited and made into different things. He saw the specific calculation of someone deciding to stop protecting themselves from something they wanted. Emma is going to ask if I'm magic again, she said. She asks everyone, he said. And what do you tell her? The truth, he said. Which is that she's going to have to make up her own mind. Something in Olivia's face released. Not collapsed, nothing so dramatic. More like the specific relaxation of a hand that has been holding a weight for a long time, and is finally, carefully, setting it down. The last Sunday in April arrived with the particular unremarkable generosity of good weather that doesn't announce itself. They walked to the park, Ethan, Olivia, Emma, on a morning when the trees were fully in leaf, and the paths were dry, and the light had that April quality of not quite believing in itself yet, tentative and precise. Emma walked between them and did not hold their hands. She was in a phase of asserting pedestrian independence, but she walked between them, which was its own statement. She had not asked Olivia if she was magic again. She had, however, decided that Olivia needed to be taught the correct method for drawing horses, which had occupied the better part of 2 Sunday afternoons, and which Olivia had approached with the seriousness she brought to everything, producing careful and genuinely improving sketches that Emma evaluated with the candor of an expert. Better, Emma had said, of the most recent effort, but the legs are still wrong. The legs are very difficult, Olivia had agreed. Yes, said Emma, but you'll get it. There was, Ethan thought, no better benediction than that. He did not think that grief had been resolved, or departed, or healed into something clean. It did not work that way. In his experience, Lily was still in the apartment in the mug with the chipped handle, in the photograph, in the green scarf on the hook by the door that he still had not moved and perhaps would not move, because it was hers and that was all right and did not require explaining. Emma still slept with the crescent moon nightlight. He still sometimes reached for his phone to tell Lily something before remembering. These things did not need to be fixed. He had spent years trying to determine whether the persistence of grief was a failure of recovery or simply the honest record of love. He had concluded, without fanfare, that it was the latter. You did not stop missing people who deserved to be missed. You simply, eventually, stopped allowing that missing to constitute the whole of what you were. What had changed was something about the quality of the space around them. The grief was the same shape, but it no longer occupied the whole of the room. There was something else in there now, something that had arrived in the form of a woman with a familiar face and an entirely unfamiliar way of being in the world, and had, over the course of a winter and a spring, become simply present. Olivia walked beside him, her hands in the pockets of her jacket, watching Emma negotiate the path ahead with the serious intention of someone who has identified an optimal route and is committed to it. She had a way, he'd noticed, of watching Emma with a quiet attention that cost her nothing to give and everything to withhold. The look of someone learning to let themselves care about a person they had not expected to care about and finding it less frightening than anticipated. "She's going to be extraordinary," Olivia said quietly. "She already is," Ethan said. They walked for a while without speaking. The park moved around them, a couple with a dog, 2 children on bikes, an old man reading on a bench with the comfortable absorption of someone who has found the right spot. "I called the hospital," Olivia said, "where we were born. I requested the records." She paused. It took a while to decide to do it. "I kept thinking it would, open something I couldn't close again." "Did it?" "Yes," she said, "but differently than I expected. There was a name, our birth mother. She was 17. Another pause. "She's in her mid-40s now. She lives in Vermont." He looked at her. "I don't know yet," she said. I don't know. It's a lot to decide." "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "It's just I've been making decisions alone for a very long time. I'm not entirely used to that meaning something different." He understood what she was saying. It was not a request. It was an observation, offered carefully, in the way that people who have protected themselves for a long time offer things tentatively, one thing at a time, waiting to see if it's received. He reached over and took her hand. She did not pull away. She adjusted her grip slightly, making it more comfortable, which was very much in character. Ahead of them, Emma had discovered something significant in the grass at the edge of the path and was crouching to examine it with scientific focus. She looked up and saw them and registered their joined hands with the equanimity of someone who has been told what she needs to know and found it sufficient. "It's a worm,"